what do you make of this entire news about X number is dead or Y number is dead? Now, so let me give you a full disclosure. While
Yeah.
because of my unique lifestyle where I live 5.5 months outside India in Canada, I do have my connections with a very giant Iranian diaspora. I do talk to them. I've had a few Iranians come on my podcast also. Uh, if you talk in the Iranian diaspora, whether in America, in Canada, in the Western world, they are very anti the mullah regime and everything, and
Yes.
they are the ones who are giving the Americans this 12,000 people are dead or 20,000 people are dead. The number that's being given by the diaspora Iranians, who are by and large either atheists or mildly secular Iranians. Like they're either that they're basically ex-Muslims by and
Okay.
large, most of them. So till the extent I know so many Iranians who just don't drink beer on camera because their mom might see who's living in Iran.
Mhm.
It till that
Okay.
extent,
Uh-huh.
and they have this version that yes, the mullah regime is being brutal, and yes, many have been killed, and we have confirmed with our family. uh which version is correct? Because I know you tweeted that your criticism, I think it was a first post or someone, where you said we are just regurgitating Western talking points. Now, what is your point of view? I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want you to explain.
Right. So there's been this narrative that about 12,000 people have been killed in Iran by the Iranian regime, the regime of the mullahs and the ayatollahs. I'm sure that there is violence that's happening in Iran. I am not a huge fan of the regime of the ayatollahs by any means whatsoever. I am completely in favor of the Iranian people having self determination and deciding the future of their country. But my point is, if the Western media is putting out this figure of 12,000 dead, what is the proof? What's the evidence of that? When you report something, you have to report responsibly. Do you have boots on the ground? Do you have reporters out there in Iran who have actually seen the numbers of dead, in Mashhad, in Tehran, there, wherever? Have you been able to add the tally up the numbers and come to this figure of 12,000? Or are you just saying that, we have this diaspora that's making these claims, so we're going to add up what they're saying and come to this figure of 12,000? My point is, there is no way that anyone can verify this claim that the Western media is putting out of 12,000 dead. And we know very well that the Western media is prone to exaggeration when it comes to nations that are not aligned with their interests. I mean, look at the way they've been reporting about India on so many occasions, right? So my main point is that this seems to be a wild exaggeration potentially. And even if it is not, what evidence do you have that 12,000 people have died? And what frustrates me even more is that the Indian media merely regurgitates Western media talking points. That's all, uncritically. So and so BBC or CNN or whoever said something, so we're going to report it as if it's the gospel truth, which is a very poor journalistic practice. That's not how we do journalism. Unless you are on the payroll, I mean, maybe whatever. That's a whole different factor. I'm not saying that so and so is on so whoever's payroll, but yeah. So I am extremely skeptical about this figure of 12,000. I am sure there have been deaths. We saw, some videos that have trickled out of Iran of you know of men firing upon crowds. We have seen some videos of a number of dead bodies here and there. So clearly, violence has taken place. Clearly, people have died. But who has been the people or the side that has been firing on crowds? We're not quite sure. The Iranians are claiming that it's Mossad agents who have infiltrated Iran and who are doing this. Uh, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I can even believe the Iranian regime. So I'm not sure what to believe. But this 12,000 dead claim that's floating around, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm extremely skeptical about that. That's where I stand.
No, I think it's a fair point that, like, the number, I also accept I have to be skeptical about the number, but there are so many videos that have come on the internet as
Yeah.
I was doing my research for our chat. You know,
Yes.
people who have access to Starlink and stuff like that, they have recorded, they have sent, like, mosques
Mhm.
being burned down, people being
Yeah.
shot at. It's horrifying what has happened there. But at the same time, my problem is that first post, would write pothi after pothi criticizing the Western media, breaking things down about fact checking them and everything when the Western media reports on India. Now, why
Uh-huh.
would they just take what the Western media is saying about Iran blindly? Is something even I was thinking. There's like, if I go by the New York Times reportage of India and the BBC's reportage, like in New York Times in 2023 wrote an article that जो Chinese, Indo-Chinese है, वो actually Pakistani Chinese. It's like there is a limit to being ridiculous, right? These are objectively verifiable facts that are written by food historians that it was invented in Kolkata by a Chinese
That's right.
person. And some bits and bobs were, in Mumbai, but majorly in Kolkata, majorly. And to have, saying ye Pakistan mein bana hai and stuff like that. So there are many occasions, and in fact I, in the past, in my monologues, I've even shared that most of the Western media coverage, I think BBC and ek do channel aur the, when they had started doing a content analysis of Western media coverage of India, it was overwhelmingly negative.
Negative. That's right. Overwhelmingly.
So, so if that is the methodology that I can use for my own country, again, I am not saying that the regime is not killing people.
Yeah.
Even I find the 12,000 figure very hard to swallow, very hard to
Yeah.
digest. Like I just don't understand. It doesn't mean that the regime should not go if the Iranians don't want it, right? So both
Yeah.
can be right.
Yeah. And you know what? The thing about the Indian media is that I've seen this even in the Indian media's coverage of the Ukraine war. You'll see a couple of Indian reporters who will be on the ground in the initial phases of the war, and they are all in Ukrainian territory. If you really want to put forth an unbiased, balanced perspective of what's going on in the conflict, have a couple of reporters on Ukrainian held territory, have a couple of them on the Russian held territory, and let's have a balanced coverage of what's happening on both sides. But they will have everyone on the Ukrainian side, and various Indian media channels are essentially just repeating the talking points of Western media. Essentially, that they'll watch the Western news, or they'll read the news from a Western source, and then they'll go and say this is what's happening. So that is extremely poor reportage, extremely poor journalism. The Indian media is well, abysmal standards, actually.
Yeah, I mean, but then how does, okay, I know the Indian view. Like I have read articles, right? And I understand where the perspective is coming of, like the Shah of Iran. He may not be the best candidate. In fact, like I did kind of understand where the Jerusalem Post also was coming from, that op-ed there. But this, as far as the Indian view is concerned, we should not be happy that the mullah regime is going, is because
No.
the previous Shah was A, B, C, X, Y, Z. I just think that's a wrong axiom, because you don't know what the new Shah is going to do. B, that India was X economy, X military strength. This India is Y economy, Z military strength. So don't you think they will also have, like, India's geopolitical position in the world has also changed simultaneously?
Look, India's geopolitical position has changed drastically since 1979, when you had the Islamic Revolution, the deposition of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The thing is this: when you had Mohammad Reza Pahlavi ruling Iran, he was a pretty canny guy. He knew how to handle power, and we know that he was an American agent. He was a Western agent. Everyone knows that. He came to power when Mohammad Mossadegh was deposed. Mohammad Mossadegh had essentially nationalized Iran's oil industry, and he had taken control of it back from the West. And then you have Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who comes back to power, and then he once again hands over all the oil assets, etc., essentially to the West. And then you have 1979, the mullahs take over, and they are totally anti-West, and they regard America, United States, as shaitan-e-bozorg, and so on. And today there is talk of maybe a regime change in Iran. Now, let's say there's a regime change, okay? The mullahs are deposed, and you have, hypothetically, the son of the late Shah, Reza Pahlavi, coming to power, let's say, hypothetically. Now, his dad was a Western agent. Reza Pahlavi has spent most of his life in the West. If he comes to power with US help, he's going to be a new US agent. So it's going to be the good old situation back again. The Americans will control primarily. The primary objective is to control Iran's oil wealth, obviously. China's about 15 to 20% of China's oil imports come from Iran. So that's going to be a big blow to China if the Americans can, have complete control over that. then what happens is that the entire geopolitical balance of power changes in the region. You have American assets everywhere. Iran was one balancing factor that goes the way of Iraq essentially in 2000, whenever it was, 2003, yeah, that sort of thing. And then I expect if there's a regime change and the Americans take over Iran, whether it's directly or indirectly, I expect Iran to become once again an anti-India nation, the way it was before 1979. It's going to be aligned with Pakistan. The worst case scenario you can imagine is American troops in POK in 2028 or something, or 27, who knows. Um, so that's how I see it, and that's why, see, I am not a fan, like I said before, of the mullah regime. It would be great for the people of Iran if they can have absolute self-determination, democracy. If they don't like the Islamic law, then maybe they can have secular law or whatever. If they want to be Zoroastrians or Christians or atheists, live your life the way you want. That's how, civilized people live. But if you have a regime change, then it's going to be bad for India. It's going to allow the Americans to exert more pressure on India.
Now the point is, whether the regime change happens or not is literally out of the hands of what the Indian government wants or can do. So let's assume it happens. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Let's assume it happens. And this is my last question. And after that, if you have anything, we can do that, or we'll just go straight into audience questions. Now, if it happens, what are the plays India has, and what should India do in that scenario?
Right now, first of all, regime change is not that easy when it comes to a nation as large as Iran. The Americans did it the really hard way in Iraq 2023 onwards, and there was like several years where you had large scale insurgencies in Iraq, and the Americans took a lot of time to be able to slowly, gradually control various parts of Iraq. Right? It's really tough. Look at what they've done in Venezuela. They went in, they abducted Maduro and his wife, kidnapped them, and brought them to the US, but they left the rest of the government intact. And now you have Delcy Rodriguez, who has taken over the de facto presidency of Venezuela, because she was number 2 in line. And the Americans have simply imposed conditions on Venezuela, and they expect the current government of Venezuela to carry out the demands of the Americans. So it's really hard to replace an existing governance system with a new one. You have to construct it artificially, and then you have to you have to establish its legitimacy and its actual control over the country. Venezuela is small, and the Americans did not do it there. Replace the entire government. How will they do it in Iran? I'm sure there's a lot of the Iranian population that actually is aligned with the mullahs. Maybe it's 50-50. Maybe it's not. Everyone wants the mullahs to go. So in that case, if that happens, then the Americans will be facing civil war in Iran, and the potential fragmentation of Iran. The northwest of Iran becomes the Iranian part of Azerbaijan. That could break away. You could have all kinds of chaos. You could have the Balochistan situation flare up, and the Americans may not be able to control that, and that could have some impact on Pakistan, which is a US asset. So I think it's not that it's easier said than done. So I think it's going to be pretty hard for the Americans to effect a regime change in Iran. If they do it, it's going to be an outstanding achievement. But let's say, like you say, a regime change does happen in Iran, and you have a completely pro-US government in Iran, a US asset kind of leadership in Iran. What can India do about it? Does India have any leverage, any geopolitical cards to play, and so on, is the question. The first thing that happens is that Chabahar now becomes, it goes into the hands of the US. The Americans then decide whether India can use Chabahar or not. That is what happens. Beyond that, what can India do? See, India can't intervene militarily in this matter. We aren't powerful enough right now. When it comes to the Indian subcontinent, India is the biggest nation, but the major geopolitical power in the subcontinent is actually the US. And that's why it's able to, effect regime change at will, and implement a strategy of containing India. So militarily, if there's a regime change in Iran, there's nothing India can do to prevent that from happening. All we can do if there is a regime change is try and get along with the new government in Iran. And if they play games with Pakistan, then maybe we'll have to look into that. And there's the Afghanistan angle as well, because Afghanistan, it's kind of in some way aligned with Iran. They've had some friction and all that about water and whatnot. But it will totally complicate the scenario in Afghanistan also. So there's plenty of angles, but I'm not sure at this point in time what leverage India has to affect what happens. And if the regime change happens, what can we do? I think we'll have to just deal with it the way we eventually learn to deal with the Taliban, that sort of thing.